History is full of amazing stories and memorable people, but we don't care about them.
No hits, deep tracks only.
Some of the most influential people in the world have been completely overlooked or just plain forgotten. I'm Phil, and each week I'll be joined by a friendly co-host to help me break down one of history's biggest moments and the forgotten people who made them happen.
Hi, I'm Vince. I'll be today's guest host. And like Phil, I'm no history expert.
See, we're just two regular people who enjoy a great story and plenty of laughs. This is History's B-Side. Today's B-Sider is the man who reintegrated the NFL.
Okay, Phil, question. When were you the first at something?
Almost never. I mean, it's not really being the first at something because as the youngest child of my family, like I was generally the last to do things. But
right.
My middle sister, Allison, would always complain that I would get things at the same time as her. So like naturally, my oldest sister, Lindsay, would be the first ones to get things. But I would get them at the same time as Allison, which she hated. But I guess I was the first boy in my family. And then, I don't know, like, Rita, I started dating my wife before either of my sisters started dating their spouses, but we weren't the first ones married.
I was going to say, I really don't know if your sisters would be, if you dating other women first as well, that'd be a surprise, but.
Oh, no. But yeah, we weren't the first ones married. We weren't the first ones to have a kid. We were, I don't know, I wasn't the first one to have a job. Wasn't the first one to graduate college or high school or whatever. But.
Yeah, well, don't tell Allison, but I always flipped you two, and I thought you were the oldest between the two of you.
She'll probably be mad to hear that.
Oh, well.
I was
she knows where I live.
I was first chair trombone in middle school until I got to high school with some real good musicians who you know.
Met the rest of us, and you're like, oh boy. So yeah, I'm the first son in my family, like immediate family, but even then, like I have a cousin who's older than me and stuff, but not much else was I first for, but I got all the first things as a firstborn. So like first baseball, first car, first all that was me, but I'm not someone who was like, I'm not a trailblazer or a person who's pushing boundaries on things at first. I like to think of in certain things, but
yeah, I'm sure this could be debated in a certain way, but like there's not a lot of those types of people today because like most things have been achieved or accomplished.
Right. Now there's first generation college students and there's a lot of that going on. And I would say, I guess I'm the first of my immediate family, like among my generation, to have gone to college and graduated, and gone from there, like just immediate cousins and stuff. Mm-hmm. But other than that, you have first generation students, for example, who they have parents who maybe either never did it because all they did was work or.
Yeah, my dad was like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure he would have been the first one, because he's the oldest child as well, the first one in his family to really go to college and get a degree. And he was going to go work in the steel mills with his father, but he just happened to graduate high school right when the steel mills in Youngstown all closed down.
Black Monday.
Yeah, so he ended up going to college for like a criminal justice degree, and now he's a lawyer. So, I hope I got all that right, but he is one of those that like was first generation college degree and probably had a lot of firsts in his life by being the oldest born as well.
Yeah, definitely got those in there. The reason I bring that up is because when you talk about African Americans, many of them were the first in a variety of areas, particularly sports. We all know about Jackie Robinson being the first African American to break the color barrier, for example. So what we're actually going to talk about today is the man who is the first African American in the modern era of the NFL. So he reintegrated the NFL.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what the NFL is, it's the National Football League, the only current consistent professional football league in the U.S.
I was going to say, how can people not know what the NFL is, especially living in America? But I get that it's a history podcast, and there's probably some people that don't care about sports that
but
maybe don't know.
And in recent years, we've had other professional leagues that have come and gone. The Arena Football League, for example. We had that in Youngstown at one point. Arena League 2, which is the minor league version of it. You also have the USFL, which is opening shop again recently, and the XFL, which was originally run by Vince McMahon.
Well, they had that AAF. Is that what it was? AAFF, something like that?
Yeah, AAFL, which was the
Alliance of American Football, I think.
Yes, but that goal was a semi-pro league that basically was utilized to highlight players that maybe the NFL had overlooked to kind of get back into it. Unfortunately, that one failed as well. So that's why I say consistent, because the NFL has been around for a little over 100 years, and we'll kind of get into that in here in a second, but 1920 is when it started. So they've been a consistent professional league, and as we know about pro leagues, MLB, NHL, NFL, NBA, they are a monopoly as well, but they have a special monopoly that's granted by the government.
So I'm vaguely familiar with that. I know technically MLB is regulated by Congress or something. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that was the NBA too. Do you know much about that?
All of them have a special agreement with the U.S. government that says they can monopolize their league area and be the only professional area in town, or negotiate exclusive rights with different cities and different areas.
But the NFL is not like that?
Yep, all of them.
Oh, okay.
NFL, MLB, it's a special exemption for these leagues, and that's why there's argument for when teams want to move out or things like that happen. There's argument that they should have those exemptions removed and allow the people to really dictate what type of entertainment they really want to see.
Well, I mean, this is about baseball instead of football, but that's a current issue with Oakland, because they have that stadium that was used by both the Raiders and the NFL and the A's and MLB. So it's a dump, and it's not a great place to play baseball, but they've been wanting to build a new stadium, but the MLB has this policy of you can't build two stadiums within X number of miles of each other because they have radiuses for their markets, but Oakland is so close to San Francisco that they literally, by MLB's own rules, they can't build another stadium for Oakland to play in.
That's interesting, because the Raiders also were having issues with getting a stadium built there.
Yeah.
That the commissioners and the county people were like, we're not paying another dime for this.
Well, that's the other side of it, is that MLB won't technically let them build a new stadium within Oakland unless they make some kind of exception, and then the city won't pay for it, so they're threatening to just move the team entirely, which solves both problems, but that obviously isn't what the fans or the city really wants.
Tennessee is now becoming the bogeyman of that.
Nashville, Portland, Charlotte, there's back to Montreal. There's all these cities that MLB is teased about bringing teams to. But...
Well, Justin Timberlake is the backing group for one of the backing people for Nashville. So that's why so many people are worried about the Guardians now, our Cleveland Guardians. The ownership recently has allowed another minor investor to come in, which is good, because I think you and I could have a whole discussion about whether we like the ownership of the Cleveland Guardians or not.
For a different podcast.
Right. But there is debate and there's legitimate fear that if you get another owner in here, they're just going to go up and move the team down to Tennessee now. We've already seen this happen with our Browns. We've seen this happen with... or attempt to happen with, again, I'm going to bring up MLS. I know you love that league. The Columbus Crew, when the owner tried to basically pull... You've seen the movie Major League, right?
Yeah.
He basically tried to pull what the ownership did.
Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with those. I just don't follow.
So, that whole thing happened. So there's a lot of issues of using other cities to get leverage.
Right.
And because they have this exception, they're able to do these things, because you can't have another pro team come in and try to outmuscle them.
Right.
But besides that, with the NFL in general, it's over 100 years. 1920 is when it started. In fact, they have a book, if you'd ever like to read it sometime. I do have it, 100 Years in the NFL, some highlights and things like that. I can't remember if our B-Sider is actually in it or not.
I'll have to go back and look.
Originally started in a car shop in Canton, Ohio. Today, there are only 2 original teams still in existence. We had briefly discussed them. Do you know who they are?
Oh, shoot, we did. The Cardinals are one, I think. But
Arizona
they were in
Cardinals.
Arizona. Where were they? St. Louis?
Chicago.
But then, is it Chicago Bears were the other one?
Chicago Bears were the other one. They were known as the Decatur Stanleys originally.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And most of the teams at that time were based in Ohio. Ohio, Illinois, I think Indiana was some. It was mostly just Midwestern area. And so we had teams like the Canton Bulldogs and the Massillon Tigers. So for Northeast Ohio people, those are high schools now.
I mean, that's why the Pro Football Hall of Fame is in Canton. Like, people are like, it's such a random place for pro football, which is this huge entity now, but it's a random place for them to have their Hall of Fame. But that's the whole reason. It's just that's where the NFL started.
It's a really cool Hall of Fame, by the way. They're really building up the area. But you had teams in Dayton, Akron, all over, sprinkled throughout Ohio, Cleveland, Columbus. The first professional football game was actually played in Dayton.
Oh, wow.
But there was teams in New York, there was teams in Indiana, Illinois, and as stuff moved around, they have teams close and open, and along the way, the NFL has had several mergers with other leagues over the years, including the AAFL, which is a group that we've talked about, we will talk about later.
What does it stand for, do you know?
All-American Football League.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that one is, it's an old one. We'll talk about that as part of it. And the AFL being the last merger.
Is that just American Football League?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that was in the 60s. And you still see all the teams in the AFL today. So the AFC Conference, pretty much all of those teams were from there.
Okay.
Fun fact, the AFC North, our conference for You're My Favorite Team, the Cleveland Browns, was developed because of Art Modell.
Right.
So
we love him. Great guy.
Such a great guy. He's another maybe F-sider that we could talk about one day. So
on our sports history podcast. I feel like there's a certain segment that's going to love this episode, and then the rest of people are like,
can we fast forward?
History. I like history because it's not sports.
Yeah, but this is actually an interesting, and this was actually in that book that I was telling you about. When the AFL came over, when they were merging the leagues together, they needed to have an even number of teams in the leagues. The NFL had slightly more teams. Paul Brown had just bought the Cincinnati Bengals, and they founded the Cincinnati Bengals, and they wanted them to move over. And he was like, I paid for an NFL team, not an AFL team. And they're trying to get people to come over, and Art Modell went to the owners and said, look, I will gladly move over to the other side so we can have even things, but Pittsburgh and Cincinnati must come with me. Because it's Pittsburgh and Cleveland had a rivalry for years. We can't get rid of that rivalry. It's really good. Cincinnati is going to be a new one. And then at that point, I think it was the Houston Oilers were the extra team that was part of our Central Division.
Yeah.
And so that's how some of these leagues and these teams have formed. So when you see groups like the AFC West, the Broncos, Chargers, they were AFL teams that have. That's why there's bad blood among a lot of divisions, and it's hard to rearrange stuff. That's why the AFC South is such a weird...
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah, conglomeration. But the AFL was probably the best challenge to the NFL in terms of money, investments, and stuff, and they ended up reaching an agreement and coming together. That's why we had the Super Bowl. Before it was called the AFL NFL Championship.
And this is pretty similar. I mean, it's sports leagues, it's sports history. It's pretty similar to a lot of the stuff we talked about in an old episode about the actually integrating MLB, but way before it was MLB, the Fleet Walker being the first African-American professional baseball player. Right. And it was just the fact that you had all these different competing leagues that were their own entities and then eventually merged into what we know today. So in baseball's context was the American League and the National League now form Major League Baseball, but in this case it would be the AFL and the NFL merged into one NFL.
Correct. And at that point they hadn't figured out a Super Bowl name. So it was actually called the the AFL and NFL championship for the first like 3 seasons. Yeah. Now the AAFL, the All-American Football League, was taking place during the 40s. It wasn't very long lived. It was a short 4 or 5 years. It's actually where our Cleveland Browns originated from. And we won all the championships.
Yeah.
We had Otto Graham, who was super good.
Yeah.
But that league was another one where they were trying to match the NFL as much as they could, and eventually they got absorbed. And San Francisco 49ers came from there, and the Browns and the Rams, I believe, came from there. No, sorry, the Rams are in the NFL. My bad. We'll get back to that later. But
this is so confusing.
It is very confusing because there are 2 Cleveland teams.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of teams just getting pulled in. So a lot of the teams that we see are there's the original group, and then they've expanded and added and dropped people, and then they're absorbing leagues. So there's a lot going on. The modern era, however, is defined in a few different ways. For our purposes, it's described by the NFL Hall of Fame as the post-World War II era. Other sites say it's the 1960s, the Super Bowl era, as the modern era.
So what happened to the NFL during World War II? Like, why are there 2 different definitions of what the modern era is? So
with post-World War II, that's when, like, how you see the field set up and, like, hash marks. The forward pass is happening much more. The way the modern game is played is developing during that period.
But did the leagues, like, shut down because of the war? Like, you heard about that in baseball where there just weren't enough players.
They didn't really shut down. They were just severely reduced.
Okay.
And that's why the AAFL had come in trying to make, like, waves and think they could come in on the NFL at that point.
Yeah. Probably a lot of these leagues weren't, I mean, smaller leagues would have folded without having this supply of players.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so as troops are returning home and stuff, these things are being developed. But some people say the 1960s is because that's when the teams merged, the championships were happening. This is the modern NFL. Right. But our purposes, and a lot of other places start with that, and the reasons are the lines, the hash lines, the passes, the way the game is being played is the modern era. Yeah. Beforehand, you had just a lot of running straight, left, right, wing back formations, T formations, which is literally in the shape of a T, lined up behind a line.
Well, we're familiar with that stuff with the Browns because we have some good running backs, and
we do. We just don't choose to use them all the time. So, prior to the modern era, African Americans were playing professional football since the beginning, even before the NFL had formally convalesced. There were pro teams that would travel around and play. They were like travel teams. So we had African Americans playing from that point onward. Fritz Pollard, for example, in the 1920s when the NFL had formed, he was like one of the first big superstars. He played for Akron, Milwaukee, Hammond, and Providence from 1919 to 1921, and he helped manage them. So he was a player manager and a GM. He's a Hall of Famer. And have you heard of the Fritz Pollard Alliance?
No.
It's a alliance named in his honor. Their goal is to promote African Americans to prominent positions in NFL coaching and front offices.
Oh.
Their goal is to try to get people in there. So, you remember when Peyton Hillis had his amazing year for the Browns?
Yeah.
Remember who the GM was?
Was it Ray Farmer?
Correct. Ray Farmer. The Fritz Pollard Alliance was who helped secure him get a job in the front office with us and help so we could get promotions upward.
Huh.
So, it's a really good program.
Yeah.
Because the NFL is 85%?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if we're going to talk about race in the NFL, they still have a long way to go. Like, obviously, the players are, we're talking about players in this episode, but like the players are majority African American now, but coaching on up it's mostly white.
There's not many offensive or coordinator positions that have African Americans or black people.
Mm-hmm.
GMs even less. Head coaches, there's hardly any. Mike Tomlin.
Current ones?
Yeah,
I'm struggling.
Mike Tomlin.
I mean, I can name some retired ones. I mean, like Tony Dungy and Lovie Smith and...
Right. I think it's just Mike Tomlin.
There's got to be someone else.
Robert Saleh is not African American. He is Muslim, so he's a minority coach, which they count. So a minority coaches in general, their goal is to promote minority coaches, but
right.
Arthur Smith, maybe.
In fairness, I couldn't name a ton of NFL coaches now.
The head coach of the Dolphins is an African American, and the GM is also an African American there.
Hi guys, just want to interrupt here with a little bit of context. At the time that we recorded this episode, we were midway through the 2021 NFL season, and Brian Flores, an African American head coach, was still the coach of the Dolphins. Since the season completed, he was fired from his position and currently has a lawsuit pending with the NFL regarding racial discrimination. By the time this episode publishes, there may be some updates on that pending litigation, but it just goes to show more about the NFL's continuing problems with racial equality. We'll also talk a little bit about the history of the Los Angeles Rams and even touch on the Cincinnati Bengals long before those two teams faced off in Super Bowl 56. So there might be some things that are out of context, but just want to give you a little background on what the situation was like at the time that we recorded this episode. For now, we'll get back into it.
So, there's a few, but it's very, as we've just proven, we can't think of many.
And so, are there any non-white owners in the NFL?
Shad Khan of the Jaguars.
Okay.
He is not. Everybody else is lily white.
1 out of 32.
Mm-hmm. So we've had these players playing in this professional league. From 1933 to 1946, no African Americans were signed or drafted to the NFL.
So do you have any idea, like the pre-modern NFL had African American players? Do you have any idea what their experience was like? Was it like, were they generally accepted? Was it is it because the league wasn't structured as the way we view it now? We maybe don't. It wasn't as popular, so it wouldn't have been like in the limelight that you had black professional players.
Correct. I think that who they played with didn't mind too much. Some of them probably did, so they hit them harder. But I think the owners weren't super thrilled by it.
They were just trying to have bodies to have a product on the field.
Correct. Yeah, we know that you're good enough, but the last person to play in the NFL in 1933, I can't remember his name. The owner had talked about how they reached an agreement with him that they would release him because he was getting pretty beat up and a variety of stuff.
No kidding.
Yeah. There is rumor that in 1933, the owner of the Washington football team, formerly known as the Washington Redskins, during that period, his name was George Preston Marshall, did not like black people. And when he moved his team from Boston to D.C., which was already segregated, he made sure his team stayed segregated. And he was very vocal about this, apparently. So he had influence.
Super surprising.
Super surprising. He even changed, apparently, the song for them. He changed the lyrics of their song for Fight for D.C. to Fight for Dixie.
Nice.
Great guy. Let me tell you, really, really standout man. But he kind of led the charge, I think, of not... There was never an official block, like in baseball with Kennesaw Mountain Landis literally saying no black people.
Right.
In here, there was nothing. It was a gentleman's agreement among owners to keep out African Americans. Probably more pushed by him than anybody else. As we'll see later on, it took another 32 years after the NFL was reintegrated for them to sign another black person. Also with that, other explanations are that the league just focused on white players due to a shrinking market. They're trying to keep teams afloat during this time, and they know that getting white people is going to be an easier pill to swallow for some people who are paying for stuff.
Yeah.
Which, again, let's be clear, none of that is a good excuse.
Yeah, for sure.
None whatsoever. Especially when you had stuff in the past. Like, come on.
It's just a way to understand kind of how these leagues developed. And it's just understanding the mindset of people at the time. Like, if you're trying to make a sport popular, which the NFL was nowhere then as it is today, like, you need to cater to the audience, and that's just kind of...
Correct. But
it was a white audience who didn't want to see non-white athletes.
Which doesn't make sense considering that a lot of black players are playing in the NCAA in college.
Yeah.
You're just not drafting them and refusing to sign them.
Well, there's some other issues.
There's a lot of issues in that
too.
as well. Yes. So there's, your HBCUs and stuff that a lot of players went to those places. But yes, there's that's a whole nother B-side that we could discuss another time. But all that changed with the Cleveland Rams moving to Los Angeles and the signing of Kenny Washington.
So obviously we're talking about the Rams in this story, this person. But I think it's funny that, like, the Rams started in Cleveland, and clearly, like, none of this happened in Cleveland, but on our baseball episode about Fleet Walker, like, we talked about Cleveland, then the Indians, and how they had Larry Doby, Satchel Paige, Frank Robinson, and a lot of, like, color barrier breakers played in Cleveland.
Not just but legendary barrier breakers.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And, like, even Fleet Walker himself, like, played semi-professional baseball in Cleveland. So it's an interesting connection, even though we're not talking about Cleveland.
It really is, and it's funny because the whole goal of the Cleveland Rams moving to L.A. is because they want to beat the AAFL to get out to L.A. The Cleveland Dons are not the Cleveland Dons, the something Dons. They call themselves the Dons. They were moving to L.A. as part of the AAFL. They're going to be the L.A. Dons, named after the owner of the team or something. So, your L.A. Rams that are currently in L.A. that have moved to St. Louis and then moved back are originally the Cleveland Rams.
So, when the Browns ceased to exist, my dad actually became... Well, I don't know if it was when they moved to Baltimore or earlier in his life, but my dad is sort of at some point a Rams fan just because of their originating in Cleveland.
Yeah, that's cool.
It might have been way before they moved. I'd have to ask him again. But yeah, I never really understood why, because I always thought it was when he was younger, he liked the ram on the helmet. But
I mean, that's a good reason.
Apparently the fact that they were from Cleveland originally too is tied into it.
Right. I liked the Dolphins because my best friend at the time liked the Dolphins, and I love Dan Marino. I still have an affinity for the Dolphins. Yeah. The Browns are still my team, but yeah, it is an interesting connection. It's interesting how this happened because they wanted to beat out the AAFL team and get there.
But I just wanted to pitch, my birthplace as a pinnacle of anti-racism, even though they certainly have their own issues too.
Yeah. With that in mind, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to get into our main person.
Before you inevitably skip this ad, take a moment to boop the snoot of your furry History's B-side companion.
And while you do, why not just the ad play in the background?
Odie, get off the microphone!
Boop.
But seriously, we just wanted to take a minute to tell you some ways you can support the podcast on our website, historiesbside.com.
The first and most direct way you can support our podcast is by signing up for a membership. You can join at any monthly contribution level, but we suggest $10 to start. Though, please feel free to pick whatever fits into your budget. A membership will get you access to monthly bonus episodes, show notes, future episode cues, surprise gifts, and more.
We also have on there our merch shop, which includes things like t-shirts, hoodies, hats, drinkware, bags, stuff for adults, kids, and dogs, so you can rep your favorite history podcast everywhere you go.
You'll also find extras, including free stickers, bookmarks, and postcards. You can suggest an episode topic, or submit a question about the podcast, one of our episodes, or even about us.
That website again is historiesbside.com. And now, back to the episode.
Boop.
Well, welcome back to our enthralling football story. I love sports stuff. So if you listen to the other podcasts, sport business is my undergrad, and I love history. So when I can combine these, it's a ton of fun.
The last time we did a sports topic, it was like me rambling about baseball, which is something that I like, and Matt, who likes sports, but not like on a very
and Matt's on his own
deep level.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm just gonna let you talk about baseball, and
I'm going to get some popcorn.
I'll jump in when we talk about racism.
I'm ready for this one. So the man we're going to talk about today, his name is Kenny Washington. And he was a running back for the Los Angeles Rams, formerly the Cleveland Rams. Born in Los Angeles in August of 1918, his father played pro ball in the Negro Leagues, and he was raised by his grandmother and uncle, who was the first black uniformed lieutenant in Los Angeles Police Department history. So already making first with this.
Yeah.
And he was a multi-sport athlete in both baseball and football.
So his father played in the Negro Leagues for baseball?
Baseball.
Okay,
yeah.
So there wasn't like a Negro Leagues for football.
No. There's not a specific Negro League that I know of. I know that there were semi-pro integrated teams later on, but during this time period, it was just pro baseball, the Negro Leagues for baseball. I guess his dad really wasn't, from what I've read, his dad wasn't really involved in his life. He would play baseball, go work, whatever, and when he was low on money, come back, get stuff, just disappear. So Washington really credits his grandmother and his uncle with raising him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But yeah, so he's a multi-sport athlete, particularly baseball and football. Kenny Washington attended UCLA, where he was a tailback alongside Woody Strode, Ray Bartlett, and Jackie Robinson. You might know who he is.
Oh, who's that?
He's just some guy who played football and baseball. Also broke a color barrier.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Pretty big name from American sports history.
Right. So have you heard of, the ESPN 30 for 30 documentaries?
Yeah.
You ever see the commercials? What if I told you?
Yeah.
What if I told you that there was a player who was better than Jackie Robinson in baseball?
Well, I mean...
That would be Kenny Washington. So people who talked about them said he hit for better power, had a better arm, was more athletic than Robinson.
So why didn't he pursue a career in baseball?
I think he liked football better, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I could see that. I mean, there's tons of today NFL players that get drafted to play baseball and go play the NFL.
Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I mean, there's different reasons.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, there's more money, more immediate money to be made in the NFL. Mm-hmm. But there's also less brain soup to be made in baseball.
Correct. Right. But I think he liked football better. They didn't really say.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I get the sense that money probably wasn't the driving factor for Kenny Washington. I'm sure it was to some extent, but like, if he's breaking a color barrier, he might not have seen a future in the NFL coming out of college.
Right. I'm wondering if he wasn't a big baseball guy because of his father. If his father's ditching him.
Well, that's what I mean. He probably truly did just love football rather than baseball.
That's what I've kind of gotten as well. As I mentioned, these four people, Washington, Woody Strode, Ray Bartlett, and Jackie Robinson, were the four African Americans on the team, which is very rare even in college to have that many players on one team. He was the tailback, and that meant he handled the ball a lot. Washington ran and threw. So often he'd be doing both. So kind of like the quarterback position as of now, but with a running back combination. Washington rushed for 1,914 yards in his career. Also passed just as often as rushing.
Yeah.
A school record for 34 years. He was the first Bruin to lead the nation in total offense and the first consensus All-American in UCLA history in 1934. What I mean is that every team they played and every person in the country had him on a ballot. That he was one of the best in the nation.
Would that have been kind of progressive to kind of give this honor to an African American, or was that more common then, I guess? I guess I'm not that familiar with, racial integration in the NCAA. I know that's a big, dark area too, as much as it is in pro sports. But it seems that if you had 4 black athletes on their football team, they were at least a step ahead of
California seems to be pretty progressive leaning with this type of stuff to begin with.
That's true. I mean, he probably would have been more accepted there than in certain other cities.
When you think of the state of California, you've got... The only reason California is as big as it is because the government couldn't regulate what the state would be shaped like because too many people were already in it. There's a fun book, How the States Got Their Shapes. That's where I have that. I have that book. I'm a giant nerd. But, yes, so you have that, and you've got Spanish Americans, you've got Mexicans and Mexican Americans that are living in Southern California. You've got white people who have traveled across the country for gold digging and stuff, and you got this intermixing. You got African Americans, you've got people from Japan and stuff who have come over to work on construction and railroads and stuff. You have a large melting pot in California.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure there were plenty of tension still.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they faced a lot of issues traveling to other schools as well, that areas that wouldn't have been as accepting of this.
Right, and so I'm sure these issues are still happening. But this part's kind of progressive. Despite this, and also playing as defensive back, and this is where we get the racism coming up. He was named second-team All-America instead of first. It was omitted from the East-West Shrine Game, which is like the college all-star game.
Oh, wow.
This was outrageous to many and deemed as racial discrimination among media. So at least some people are recognizing, like, hey, his talent is far outweighing what you're doing to him.
But he's still not earning the honors that he probably deserved.
He's still not earning the honors that he probably deserved. So it's one of those. It's one of those things where, like, yes, he's being recognized, but not recognized to the level that he should be. So it's it's kind of difficult with that to kind of reconcile those things. And again, it's the 30s and 40s, World War II's happening, and
right.
But we know that there's still, even then, there was still a ton of segregation, a ton of stuff happening there.
Mm-hmm.
Allegedly, after graduation, George Halas wanted to sign him, but was unable to convince owners to allow integration. I put unable to convince owners and allow integration in quotes.
Because he should have been able to convince owners, or?
Yes.
It's probably a choice.
Yeah, I can explain to you who George Halas is.
Okay.
He's one of the founders of the NFL. He founded he didn't found the Chicago Bears. He was like the coach and the GM of the Chicago Bears. Then became the owner. So his family currently owns the Bears. Yeah. He is a big name in there. There is controversy about George Halas, and that he did not let black people onto his team. Remember how I said those 32 years after integration, the Redskins didn't have a team, or the Washington football team didn't have that? Mm-hmm. I stand corrected. It was the Bears. Considering that one of their players, Sid Luckman, was their quarterback, I believe, if I remember correctly, Sid Luckman was African American. He was like their star guy early on. So
and he was pre-modern, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was after this is when they basically, by policy, stopped allowing black players. Yeah.
So I think that, if I remember correctly, now I could be totally wrong. I don't remember Sid Luckman, to be honest with you. But Halas has been accused of being the guy to help kind of push for that thing. So he told during there was some sort of ceremony in Chicago. He told Washington to stick around, and he could see what he could do about getting him onto the team to sign him.
Yeah.
And then he came back a week later and told him he couldn't do it. The draft comes and goes. He's not drafted by any team in the NFL. And so he joins the LAPD and ends up coaching the freshmen at UCLA.
Oh, wow.
From 1940 to 1945, he also plays for the Hollywood Bears of the Pacific Coast League.
What was the Pacific Coast League? Is that professional football or?
Semi-pro, but It's a highly integrated team. So Willie Strode, his teammate, and I think his other teammate, Bartlett, I think all played for the Hollywood Bears.
So during these years, was he both a police officer and a football player?
Yeah.
Is that like, could you do them at the same time, or was he like a police officer during the off season?
I would assume it's more that, like, he was playing and then he would go back to the police force and be an officer at that point in time.
Guess it's a good way to stay in shape.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't really say, but he had been doing both of those things and coaching at UCLA. So he's doing a lot of different things, and he's very good at it. He's the league's highest paid player and earned all league recognition, including his first year when he suffered a knee injury. As well as these things, while he was at UCLA, he did some work for the Warner Brothers, and he also had some acting jobs that he could perform. Him and Strode both had some acting jobs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Busy guy.
Yeah. In his first year in the league, he suffered a knee injury, and this prevented him from serving in war during World War II, and instead he served a USO tour.
Do you know what that would have entailed?
Just kind of going around and rallying the troops, probably, that type of thing, or showcasing athletic ability or something like that. You remember how Captain America in the movies went around and, like, rallied the troops?
Not a movie guy.
You haven't seen any Captain America movie.
No. It's terrible.
Have you gone on YouTube and watched video clips?
Nope. It's not really my thing.
You can use that for your job and be like showcasing like fun clips for games or something at your
We don't have the
job.
rights to Marvel movies.
You have YouTube. Just throw it up
That's
there.
not how that works.
It does.
No.
But anyway, Captain America, when he gets his powers, instead of actually sending him to fight the crazy Nazi supreme guy, they instead have him going around giving rallies and stuff. The USO is just basically a tour group. So he did stuff like that.
Yeah.
So when the Cleveland Rams moved to LA, they wanted to use the publicly owned LA Memorial Coliseum, as did the LA Dons of the AAFL, which created pressure on the NFL to integrate. Why? Because both black and white taxpayers had paid for the stadium. Now, there is one person that is also credited with making the Rams integrate, and essentially forcing the Rams to integrate. The LA Tribune sports editor, William Hawley Harding, a former pro athlete and current African-American sports columnist. We'll keep these two items in mind because they kind of go hand in hand.
I think that the stadium thing is really interesting, though. Like, we were talking earlier about the conflict between the leagues and the cities for stadiums, and it's still, like, a big issue today, like taxpayer-funded stadiums and kind of the impact that has on the communities. But I love the idea that the taxpayers could argue for them to integrate because they funded the stadium that the team wanted to use.
Right, exactly. They wanted this. They wanted to use the stadium, and they're like, "Look, black and white taxpayers pay for this. You have to integrate, and you need to sign Kenny Washington. You should have signed him back then. He's the best player. You sign him. Kenny Washington is a legend in LA."
I'm shocked that worked, though.
Well,
it might not have worked in other cities where he wasn't a star at UCLA.
Here's kind of why it worked. They had the delegates from the GMs from the LA Dons and the Cleveland Rams, and Hawley Harding hears about this and sets up a conference with black media members. And they just grill into these guys. Well, what are you going to do about this? You should be signing Washington. You need to, if you're going to do this, you need to be here. And they basically pressured him. The GM of the Rams did not want to be seen as a racist, was having a hard time, like, defending action stuff.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Dons are promising they're going to hire somebody. They're going to, but they're not moving forward. And Hawley Harding and these people are asking them what they're going to do. Like, we'll sign someone. Who are you going to sign? When are you going to do it? How are you going to do this? And so what they said was that they used the stadium as cover. So when they went to sign, when they decided that they had enough of the pressure and they wanted to actually do this and laid it all out and worked it out with them that they would sign someone, they said that if the league, the owners got back and started yapping at them that they signed a black player because the league wasn't happy about it, they could use the stadium and say, look, we wanted to use the stadium because we want to be a good face in LA. We want people to come to the games. They said we had to integrate to use the stadium. That was more the cover.
Interesting.
Yeah. Kind of a what? So William Hawley Harding is really the guy who pushed this stuff.
Yeah.
And he pushed Kenny Washington specifically.
Just because he was so good at UCLA?
He was so good at UCLA. He was so good with the Hollywood Bears. I mean, you're leading the league in rushing, and you're the highest paid player, and you have a knee injury in your first year, and you're still doing that. And you're passing. So they wanted to sign two people, and when they asked Washington who they wanted, he wanted Strode, his teammate. Now, keep in mind, these guys are nearly 30. So this is not prime Kenny Washington.
I mean, you saw a lot of the same things in baseball when they integrated too. Like, Satchel Paige is a great example because he had like a I think he was 60 by the time he was finally retired from Major League Baseball. That might be wrong, but he was it 60?
It's in the 60s.
Because he came and left baseball a few times, but by the time that he was actually in the American League with the Indians, I think he was 40.
He won like Rookie of the Year,
42,
like 50,
47.
yeah,
Like he was
that.
in his 40s. It's not like these players that were barred from playing professional sports were coming straight out of college or were in their athletic prime. Like a lot of them had other careers, whether they were sports or not, before they finally made it into the leagues.
Exactly. Satchel Paige had a true rubber arm. That dude could throw, still throw in his 80s.
There's some really great interviews with him. Talking about YouTube videos, there's some really great videos of him.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But Kenny Washington is one of those guys that they really should have signed. And that's the thing that Harding was really pushing. Like, you should have signed him back in his day, and you're doing this. And it's also going to look really good that you're signing a local legend.
Yeah.
Consequently, with all this, the team signed Washington on March 21st, 1946, along with his former teammate at UCLA and current teammate for the Hollywood Bears, Willie Strode, on May 7th. This was, I have a full year before Jackie Robinson integrated the MLB. Technically, it was 6 months. But still, we go on and on about MLB and Jackie Robinson, rightfully so, because Robinson did it with grace and tenacity, and he was really, really freaking good at his sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot there, but we don't talk about it. 6 months before, the NFL was doing this.
So,
against their will mostly, but they're still doing it.
When you say with grace and tenacity, does that mean like Jackie Robinson with grace and tenacity? Does that mean like Kenny Washington was not?
Same exact thing. Quiet. He didn't really talk about it, but it kind of gnawed at them with the way they were treated a little bit. If there's a quote attributed to either him or Stroud, it's kind of a toss-up that says, if heaven needs to be integrated, I don't want to go. Similar to Robinson, he kind of kept his mouth shut that first year. And then if he needed to speak his mind, he was known to speak out when he needed to.
Yeah. Huh.
But also, seeing these players play in a violent sport helped Branch Rickey to decide that he could sign Robinson. He saw blacks and whites interacting in a violent sport and could coexist. So
kind of in a roundabout way, Kenny Washington helped Jackie Robinson.
Helped his teammate.
break the color barrier in the other sport.
Yep.
It's also plays a big role into this, the fact that football was nowhere near as popular as baseball.
Right.
Obviously very different than what we have in today's America or like our view of sports now. But like football just wouldn't have been the big stage for this type of progressive racial move. Like baseball was the top tier, the pinnacle for African American athletes to be seen as on par with white athletes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think caused the shift for us to be so obsessed with football now instead of baseball?
One, I think, was the lockout in 1994. A lot of people turned away from the game after that. Another, I think, is that football is very easy to watch on TV, and it's more action-oriented, even though it's short action-oriented.
Not slower moving, but there's long gaps between the action.
But they're scoring.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. You see something happening every time. And so I think with TV and TV rights and broadcasts really kind of pushed football forward.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball is pretty, but it can be very stagnant.
I also think, not that any of this has to do with Kenny Washington, but I think the boom of like fantasy football has done a lot of that, even though fantasy football actually started with baseball.
Right.
But it's way less work to have to do it once a week versus almost every day.
Exactly.
So I think the idea between that and the gambling aspect, I think, helped boost popularity a lot as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting to think back on that like football at one point was just kind of this thing that was happening and really only happening in America, still really only happening in America.
Right.
But it's like today it's this untouchable industry that, you know, is only in this country, but still nothing can come close to it. When at this time, nobody really cared about football.
Right, exactly.
These leagues were struggling to survive.
You have the league, leagues are struggling to survive. They're trying to fight each other for stuff. World War II is happening where people are coming back and they're trying to get into different things. Like, this is just I think that really the explosion happened after the first championship the AFL won, when the Colts beat the Super Bowl III. The Jets beat the Colts, the guarantee by Joe Namath. That was the first one where people were like, oh, this football thing is, like, exciting. I think that's really when the popularity of the NFL started going, because that was called, like, one of the games of the century. Because it was Joe Namath of New York.
Yeah, that's true. That's
guaranteeing it was little brother being big brother.
Sports love their big market teams.
Exactly. And the NFL, if you look at where the NFL is located, they're not in small market cities anywhere.
Well, a little bit. I mean, like Foxborough and Green Bay, but Green Bay has its own little history, but Foxborough gets Boston.
Right. Foxborough is more regional, though. So that's where you pull that in. But Miami, Jacksonville is a weird one. Houston, Dallas, Cleveland, Cincinnati has a large TV market.
All those cities have baseball teams too, though.
Right.
Not Jacksonville, but...
But then you've got Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, you've got Seattle, and those they have them, but the MLB also had a lot of small teams in small places going around. Like the first professional baseball team is the Cincinnati Red Stockings, or the Reds now. And baseball has this whole long storied history of the game progresses this way and like this. And the NFL is kind of chaotic and just comes together. Yeah. So it's an interesting contrast to see how they've kind of flipped. But I really think it has to do with TV marketing, the inventions of the strike in the 90s, and just how people perceive the action. Yeah. So at the same time that this was happening, the AAFL, which is home to Phil's and my favorite team, the Cleveland Browns, we've talked about them a few different times, signed Marion Motley and Bill Willis in 1946. So pretty much the same time, just slightly after. It's interesting because both of those guys are Hall of Famers. And the NFL Hall of Fame has their information up. Similar to how MLB in their Hall of Fame has Jackie Robinson in the forefront with courage, and they have a statue with his name and courage and stuff. I've never been there. I want to go.
I haven't either.
I've been to the Football Hall of Fame, and I forgot about that. They have a big statue of their very first commissioner for the NFL, and he is Jim Thorpe. Those of you may know who Jim Thorpe is. He was a Native American, and he played a bunch of sports, but he was really good at a lot of stuff, including football. There's a giant statue of him. And there are other statues of Marion Motley and Bill Willis in the NFL Hall of Fame, and they kind of push them as the forerunner or the barrier breakers. That's incorrect.
So why doesn't Kenny Washington get that recognition?
I think it's because prior to the first season in the NFL, he had surgery on both knees, which is his 5th surgery. He only played for 3 years. Willie Strode only played for 1, and they just cut him. I think some of that was they were mad that they got forced into this. Yeah. But even though he only played for 3 years, he led the league in yards per carry in his second year and holds the record for the longest run from scrimmage on the Rams, a 92-yard touchdown.
Is that a Rams record or is that an NFL record?
Just a Rams record.
Okay. And that's still standing?
Still standing as far as I know.
Huh, that's cool.
I think the longest run for a scrimmage is like 100 yards or something.
Oh, well. Can't do much more than that.
Right, yeah. You could get 103 or something. The longest record is held by a Steelers player.
There's no bias on History's B-side. We play both angles, Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, we're moving on from that atrocity. But I think it was a little bit of that. Motley and Willis are Hall of Famers. They did really well. So they're like, oh, we're going to push them forward because they were signed at the same time. But because it was the AAFL and not the NFL, technically Washington is the one. So even though he was very severely diminished playing-wise, when he retired in 1948, 80,000 people attended his final game and he got a standing ovation.
Oh, that's awesome.
They knew that he was a legend and he deserved to go out.
So he was popular in
Extremely.
Los Angeles. Did he face any of the kind of like racial aggression that Jackie Robinson did?
From what I've read, he kind of did, but he didn't really retaliate. So when he and Strode would go on the road with teams, the teams would go into the hotel, his white teammates, and they would peel off a bunch of money and give it to him to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it was because of discrimination and stuff. They, like he was trying to get into the Washington football team stadium, and they refused to let him in because he's a black guy until someone had to be like, no, he's on the team, let him inside. So, stuff like that.
I'm just shaking my head because I could absolutely see that playing out.
Exactly. And it wouldn't be surprised if it was the owner of the current team.
Oh.
He has his own mess of problems.
Yeah, he does.
But there were other times when him and Strode just liked the autonomy. And so the one night they were out at this club in Chicago, they were like, they were at some club in one of the black areas, and they were like, we've never seen this many people at once all together. And it was kind of cool. And 5 of their teammates came and found them. They had thrown a fit, but they had refused to sleep in a different area aside from their teammates, so they brought them back to the hotel.
Oh, wow.
So they at least said that it wasn't, the team did not care. So their teammates were fine with it. It was probably a lot of the outside noise.
Yeah.
And coaches and stuff like that, I'm sure, had it out for them, but Strode and some of the others would kind of retaliate on when they would attack Washington. So in the game or things like that. It is interesting because they didn't really talk much about it because he was kind of a quiet guy, it seems like. He didn't really bring things up. But I'm sure that there was stuff there.
I'm sure it was similar to, Jackie Robinson's experience and Fleet Walker, but although he was so much earlier, that probably faced some even more like different types of aggression, I guess. But just the fact that he was probably not 100%, but fairly accepted in Los Angeles and among his teammates. But once you start getting into the other cities, that's when, the real problems happen.
Right. Exactly. And I just think it's interesting that the NFL doesn't really, they had this big long video on him and about his life or something about a year or so ago, it seems like. So they're kind of making some reconciliation with it. Mm-hmm. But they're still not really pushing it forward. And again, you have Motley and Willis kind of carrying the torch inside the Hall of Fame about that, which is a little disingenuous. Not that they didn't face their own stuff or their own issues, but if we all know that, you and I know that the NFL is always not the most forthcoming with things. So there's always issues with the NFL, it seems. It's very drama-centric.
Shocking.
Mm-hmm. It's like male soap opera. It's one of those things where it's Willis and Motley deserve all the credit for being barrier breakers as well.
Right.
But give credit to the others. Come on. So after retirement, he returned to the LAPD while also working at a grocery store chain and as a whiskey distributor. He also served as a part-time scout for baseball for the Dodgers, where his son Kenny Jr. played for many years. And he went back into films. In fact, it turned out him and Strode was actually a pretty good actor. He was in Spartacus. He was in a few Italian spaghetti westerns. He was in a bunch of different things. So Strode and him had done some of that stuff. Washington died of a heart and lung problems at the age of 52 in Los Angeles. He is in the Court of Honor at the LA Coliseum and inducted in the College Football Hall of Fame. So he did get his accolades at the College Football Hall of Fame, at least.
Yeah.
Located in Atlanta, Georgia. It's new. It opened 2019, I believe, or just before the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Really cool. Highly recommend checking it out if you get a chance.
If I ever go down to Atlanta, you probably go there more than I do.
I haven't. Yeah, I have a brother down there who works down there. Shout out to him. But it's actually a really cool opportunity. I think you'd really like it.
Yeah.
Rita might enjoy some of it.
I don't think Rita cares about college football.
There are other places. You can go to the aquarium.
There's lots of great food in Atlanta.
There is. And there's a really cool aquarium. There's a Coca-Cola factory, history center that she could go to.
Yeah.
A lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
So his jersey was also retired by UCLA. It's the first jersey retired by them. Another reason I think why he was really liked by UCLA is that he obviously played really well against them, but he led their team to like their first undefeated season, ending with a 0-0 tie against USC, their arch rival.
Yeah.
So anytime UCLA can get one up on USC, always a good thing. As mentioned before, neither him nor Stroud were elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but both Motley and Willis were. It's believed Washington has been ignored due to the MLB being the national pastime during the 20th century. So Robinson breaking that barrier is more important, and Washington only played 3 years in the NFL. So it's one of those things where he probably faced that discrimination. We saw that, but he hasn't really talked about it, or he didn't talk about it.
Yeah, I thought this whole topic was interesting just because everyone knows Jackie Robinson, and we've talked about baseball before on this podcast about the color barriers there, and I don't know, it's this guy who was really the first person to break that color barrier in the NFL with a group of people, but he was really the first one signed. Yeah.
Well, just like Dobie was signed just shortly after.
Yeah, and Robinson. He's not known as well as Jackie Robinson was. But even Kenny Washington came before Jackie Robinson. And I also love the idea that, yeah, they were college teammates.
Crazy.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think he's a cool story, even though he's just someone that's not particularly well known, even among in his own field. Like, there's probably tons of NFL players who don't know who he is, and the NFL doesn't recognize or celebrate him the way that MLB does Jackie Robinson.
They're starting to get to it, but again, I think it's going to take a long while for that, because I think NFL's kind of ashamed at it. You know, you got yourself hand tied to sign somebody you probably didn't want to sign. At some point, it's going to be too obvious to ignore, but like, come on.
Well, I think you've pretty much showcased your knowledge and passion for football history. Think you can handle a little 3-question quiz?
We'll see. Let's hope you didn't find some super obscure fact I don't know about and I have to discreetly look up on my phone.
It's not all about NFL history. I think we'll see how it goes. We'll be right back. Well, thank you, Vince, for guest hosting an episode of History's B-Side.
Yeah, it was fun.
I'd like to give you the regular treatment here where we quiz you after doing all this extra work for me for absolutely free, just dedicating his time to cataloging lesser-known people in history.
I got a lot of water and tea out of the deal and some dog pets, so that was helpful.
That's your payment. You get jumped on by my dog.
Yeah.
So, as our listeners know, we like to end every episode with just a short 3-question quiz to kind of test today's host and see how much he studied his topic and around his topic. And maybe you, the listener, can play along. Maybe you're a football fan or a Kenny Washington fan.
Yeah.
You can guess some of these as we go. I don't think they'll be terribly difficult. It's stuff that you probably did come across as you were reading up on him, but stuff you might know as well, just from your knowledge of football history. So I guess we'll find out. So the first one is not about Kenny Washington, but I still feel like you might just know it or be able to guess it. It's a topic that we take very seriously as members of, or fans of the Cleveland Browns. So in 1945, which was the year prior to Kenny Washington signing with the Los Angeles Rams, the Cleveland Rams went 9-1 and won the NFL championship. What 2 factors caused the team to move to Los Angeles immediately following their championship season?
That's a good one. Let's see. Probably something to do with stadium rights. They either lost a lease or...
Nothing to do with stadium rights.
No attendance issues?
Attendance is the first one.
Okay.
So they had very poor attendance. It was actually the second lowest in the league. above only the Cardinals, who were not very good. So the championship team was just barely ahead of a really bad team.
I'm assuming part of that is because of the Browns. Like, they're obsessed with the Browns, and Paul Brown particularly.
So that's the other half of it. The Browns didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
But they were slated to become a team in 1946.
Aha.
So the owner of the soon-to-be Los Angeles Rams, Dan Reeves, didn't believe that they would be able to compete in the Cleveland market with a second professional football team, even though the soon-to-be Browns were in a different league than the Rams. But yeah, I mean, those are the two reasons. Just poor attendance and the incoming Cleveland Browns.
Paul Brown is beloved in Ohio in general, but in Cleveland in particular. You know, he was the Miami Redhawks coach. First, Massillon Tigers, I believe.
Yeah, I knew Massillon.
Bulldogs. Then Miami Redhawks. Then Ohio State, where he won a national championship. Then to Cleveland.
It's probably a good way to get yourself an Ohio football legend.
Right, exactly. When you start the cradle of coaches, when you get a national championship, when you win multiple championships, and then found another team that goes to a Super Bowl twice.
All right, so your second question. And you came so close to saying this one in the episode. I was really worried. But you didn't quite mention the actual answer. And so you mentioned that his jersey number was the first one retired by UCLA. Mm-hmm. What number did he wear?
13. I did mention it.
Did you?
Yeah, I said his jersey number 13 was retired.
Oh, I didn't think you said the actual number. All right, well, you got a freebie then. But yeah, he wore that both at UCLA and for his 3 seasons with the Los Angeles Rams.
Nice.
Well, man,
sorry.
I am not stumping you. This is not good. Question number 3. You mentioned that he was an actor and starred in some TV series as well, but 3 main films. Can you name any of the 3 films that he starred? I don't know that star is the right word, but 3 films that he played a role in.
Porter? He was a porter in one. But I think that's a job, not an actual movie. Oh, I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, this one is pretty tough.
They briefly mentioned it in some of the readings, but it was, again, mostly was about Strode, who really got in the movies later on. He made over 100 films.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know about Washington.
So the movies, 2 of them came out in 1949. They were called Rope of Sand and Pinky.
Okay.
The third one came out in 1950, and it was the Jackie Robinson story, which I thought was super interesting because it was like, and like you've seen the movie 42, the recent movie 42, but it seems like a very early version of that, like a very similar story, except it actually starred Jackie Robinson as himself.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, just judging by the timeline here, like Jackie Robinson would have filmed this movie while he was still playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And Kenny Washington was in it. He's credited as having played the Tigers manager. Oh. Which I assume means Detroit Tigers, but that seems odd that they would have had a black manager.
That might have been...
So it could have been like a Negro League thing, maybe.
That one might have been the... Oh, shoot.
I haven't seen the movie. I would like to find it. I think I actually read that it's like in the public domain, but it might not be anymore. The Robinson family might have gotten the rights to it or something.
Yeah, probably. I know that everyone knows about the Monarchs. That's their... You said the Tigers, right?
Yes.
Just trying to see. I'm looking up the Negro League names just to see. Cincinnati Tigers.
So maybe that's what... I don't know. We'd have to, I guess, see the movie to figure out.
Yeah, 1920 to 1936, 1920 to 1931. So, yeah. But yeah, that film sounds familiar, and Pinky sounds familiar, but I never watched any of them. But I didn't come across any of that in my reading.
Well, I'm glad I could stump you on one question. You're very knowledgeable on your topic, and I appreciate you putting in the work for this episode.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun. I enjoy this type of stuff.
So we think Kenny Washington was a good guy? We don't really have anything
negative
to say about him.
The city of Los Angeles might rise up if we said no. But yeah.
That's cool, though. I mean, I've never been to Los Angeles, so I'm not like familiar with their sports scene. And, you know, most of the Los Angeles hero athletes, you think like Kobe Bryant and
right, Lakers, Dodgers.
Yeah, like all the historical Lakers and Dodgers. Yeah, exactly that. So it's cool to think of like a lesser known football player, but the fact that he was popular because of UCLA and not getting the recognition he deserves in the NFL.
Exactly. And that he got to play his prime year still in front of LA fans with the Pacific Coast League and the Hollywood Bears.
Yeah.
So he's in the public eye with them for so many years. And it's funny because that's why when the league was trying to move teams, LA wanted the Rams because that's our team. We want them back.
Right.
Although, like, sometimes I feel like they liked Oakland Raiders better. No one likes the Chargers, unfortunately. They're a fun team, but...
Well, San Diego liked them until the owner got greedy.
Yeah, exactly. Their owner was refusing stuff and just moved him, and now they don't want him until the owner sells the team, and he's not going to do that, unfortunately.
Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of History's B-Side. Really appreciate you guys listening in. If you want more, feel free to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, at History's B-Side. You can email us comments, questions, suggestions, historiesbside@gmail.com, or if there are corrections about something Vince said, just find him.
You can
Don't
find
blame
me.
me.
I'm pretty easy to find.
Just kidding. I'll shoulder any criticisms you have of Vince.
He can text it to me and laugh at it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with more History's B-Side.
Thanks, guys.
History's B-Side is an independent, listener-supported podcast. Leave us a review or subscribe to the show on your favorite podcasting service, and follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at History's B-Side. Send us your feedback or inquire about sponsorship and advertising opportunities by emailing us at podcast@historiesbside.com. You can support the show by becoming a member or making a one-time contribution at historiesbside.com. While you're there, check out our merch shop, extras, and more. This episode was researched and produced by your host, Philip Hall, and my co-host today, Vince Colati. Thanks for listening to History's B-Side.